Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. Today we have Ron Backus joining us. So, Ron, before we dive into your story, a few sports questions for you.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Favorite all-time memory, you being an NCAA track athlete at the University of Minnesota.
Those questions about favorite, there's so many favorites, but I think most of my memories are centered around the relationships I had, first and foremost with my coach, my throws coach, Steve Forsyth. But as a team, the best part of being on track team was spring break trips, because it was a chance to get away. It was pretty, as far as competition, it was early in the outdoor season. It was a prep phase. And so there wasn't a lot of pressure. There was a track meet down there and you wanted to do well. And it was, you get from the freezing temperatures of Minnesota, you go down to Louisiana or Arizona, and you just feel like a different person. And but to do that with your teammates, you usually didn't stay in the nicest places. Some of the places we stayed in were like dorms, but it was just fun to do it together as a team and just to be in the warm weather. And for me, it was a chance to start throwing discus because up in Minnesota, you don't throw too much discus in December. So those were the memories of the trips that we had. And anytime we went on a trip as a team, it was just special.
Yeah, that kind of relationship building and just being around your teammates. You're like a family together.
And that's the best part of track. There's no helmets. Your face isn't covered. Even with your competitors, you built relationships. It was awesome.
So what about your favorite all-time athlete in any sport?
This is from pure athleticism. This is easy. That's Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods. It's just, and it's interesting how in some ways the sports consumed them, but their performance, there's no two athletes I enjoyed watching, when they were competing, I made effort towards watching.
Totally agree. MJ and Tiger. What about a favorite memory? You were in the 92 Olympics?
Right. Yeah, I was in the 92 Olympics. I think the memory was making the team because I had missed the Olympic team in 88 by a centimeter. But even if we go back further, my goal of my dream was formed at 12 years old, when the question that every kid asks to their buddy, what do you want to do when you grow up, kind of thing. And when you get out of high school, and that was always my answer. And for whatever reason, I think this just has to do with my older siblings being in track and then watching the Olympics on TV. I thought that was the coolest sport event, both winter and summer. And so I think making the team, and then that moment you realize you made it, and then you go over to the stands. And I remember specifically hugging my coach and then my parents. And I think that's significant that I went to my coach and then my parents, but to hug my mom and dad. And I lost my dad shortly, not too many years after that. And that was just a special memory.
That's pretty awesome. All right, let's get into your story. So share with the listeners about growing up. You grew up in Cold Springs, Minnesota, and some of the highlights and challenges of growing up in Cold Springs.
Well, it's a small town USA experience. The great thing about Cold Spring was Cold Spring itself. It was a very nice town. They really liked their sports. We had for a small town, we had a great high school. I grew up in a pretty new high school. People were very supportive of athletics. If you were a good athlete, you were known in town. There was lakes and rivers, and I liked hunting, and just the whole experience of that idyllic Americana childhood was there. You could just ride your bike everywhere. We never locked our house, and the keys were always in the cars. We went on vacation for a week, and the keys were left in the cars, and the house was open. So I never knew that doors locked, like house doors. Everything was just open. So it was that feeling of safety, and also for me and my family, it was Thanksgiving and Christmas. Just the idea of at Thanksgiving, my extended family got together, and at Christmas, it was a special time. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. Holidays were a big deal.
And then you also played other sports. I know you were involved in track and but there's other sports you're involved in too, right, at Cold Springs?
It's when you have I grew up and we had this room in our basement of our house that we call it our rec room. And it was our family gathering room. And you walk in and we had an indoor charcoal barbecue pit, which was a highlight. Like literally you could barbecue steak all year round, real charcoal. And then we had a pool table and such. But we had a big trophy case at the end of the room. And it was just looking at that and seeing how my brothers and my sister put so many awards up there, that kind of became my identity in a good way and sometimes in a negative way, because I formed my identity and my place in our family was based on how well you did in sports. And that's what you got the praise for. So it's a performance-based family, but that really shaped me. And so then I wanted to do every sport. In middle school, I did football, basketball, track, wrestling, and baseball. If there was a sport to play, I played it. And then they made me choose between wrestling and basketball. So of course, Roger, I chose basketball. and then I did football and track in high school. But ever since I was 12, there was something about the Olympics and throwing the shot and discus that I really enjoyed. No one told me my fun in the summer was to take my discuses on my bike, go up to the high school and throw a discus by myself. I hated shot put in high school, but I loved throwing the discus.
Well, share with the listeners about finishing up high school, about signing a scholarship with North Dakota, but what happened 7 days before, I think you mentioned about before the camp, and then eventually attending Hamlin College your first year.
My biggest problem is I loved everything. I love football. And I was good at it. And I love Friday Night Lights. I love the whole camaraderie of it. I love the game. I wanted to play college football. I got interested from a lot of schools, a couple D1, but a lot of D2. And I never knew small town, you don't understand college recruiting. Like to go on, someone pays for you to come up and they feed you. And at that time, unfortunately, they take you out for a good time and they probably shouldn't be. And it's like you feel special. And they had the best package as far as financially. And my family we were in the lower middle class. And so to pay for college was really difficult. And I guess for me, I saw it as a way to go to college too. But they said I could throw a shot and discus. And so I thought, okay, great. I'll be able to do both. And then so I signed the letter of intent in the fall. And it was awesome. And I was excited to go. And I went into the spring and I did really well in track. Like I made a big jump and I started getting attention from college coaches for throwing shot and discus. I was a state champion in discus. All of a sudden, I started getting all this interest in track, and that was my love. To go to the Olympics was still my dream. And so I think I just wasn't settled in my heart. And I started visiting some colleges over the summer, and I want to check them out. I know I'm going to play football, but I just want to see what it's like. And I met my favorite coaches in all sports have always been my shot and discus coaches. Not trackness, but my shot and discus coaches are just great motivators, and I just love my shot and discus coaches. So I met two of them. A guy at lacrosse was really tempted for me to go there, Mike Saunders. And then when I met Dick Mulkern at Hamlin, who just recently passed away at the age of 100, a legendary coach there, and I met him and just how he talked about the sport and the relationship and just how the other throwers loved him. And it felt like being in that college just felt right for that first year. And so so this is getting in late summer. I called the head football coach and just said, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to come to camp 7 days later. And he goes, well, you can't play football anywhere for a year. I said, that's okay. I'm going to be going for track. He goes, oh, that's okay. And he knew my background and he knew my brother. And he goes, I'm happy for you. He said, I want to wish you all the luck. And he goes, the only bad thing is, Ron, he goes, we had your picture in the program as upcoming stars. We have a whole program and people are going to go, where's this guy that's supposed to be coming to North Dakota? So he laughed. And I still was good friends with him later on whenever I see him. So it worked out pretty well.
So share with the listeners, kind of eventually you went to Hamlin for a year and then your journey to the University of Minnesota, and then also share with us some of the highlights and challenges competing at the national level in discus and shot.
Yeah, Malkern was a great coach. He taught me how to spin in the rotation shot, and I was a good discus thrower. And I actually got third in shot and discus my freshman year in the conference, the MIAC. The only problem is my two teammates were ahead of me. If they weren't there, I would have been conference champion. Went to nationals, and going to nationals helped me realize that as a freshman, realize that I could probably compete at the next level. And then it got really expensive from my freshman to sophomore year. I may have stayed there because of Mulkern, but it got really expensive. My scholarship money wasn't where it was, and so I couldn't afford it. So my brother John introduced me to the throws coach at the University of Minnesota, Steve Forseth. And once I met him, it's all my whole athletic career could be where it went is really about coaches, good and bad. And I met Steve Forseth, and we just hit it off. And it was more affordable and the potential to earn a scholarship, which he said I had a great potential to earn a scholarship. So I walked on. My first year was a redshirt year. And then the next year, I think they gave me books. And then the next year, I got a little bit more. And then eventually, I got a full ride as I started to have success. But here's the thing about the competing at the next level. I never really thought about it because I never was focused on who I was competing against. It was never about others or placing. For me, it was always just getting better. Like every day, I just wanted to get better. And I wanted to throw further every time I threw. And to me, it was ultimately, I think it was just a mindset of mastery. I loved the technical aspect of throwing. It wasn't about competing and placing. It was about just mastering this technique that was so difficult. The rotation and shot is a very difficult, and the discus, believe it or not, it's not just big hulking guys, strong guys throwing heavy objects. There's so much technique involved in it, and it determines so much of your success. I wasn't the strongest guy, but I beat a lot of guys stronger than me because my technique was better. And so I love that aspect of it.
And then you kind of reached that national level. Was it your last couple of years at the
No,
NCAA
right away.
Right away?
My first year competing, I got fourth in the NCAA shot put. And you might go, well, I thought you hated the shot put. I did in high school until I learned how to spin. And once I learned rotation, I had about a 10-foot differential from my glide to my spin. It mattered that much to me. So I was that much better with the rotation because I was a good discus thrower. So it translated into the shot. But I started having success in the shot put because it was new and exciting and I was mastering the spin and it was popping. And by the way, the other thing that was the element, I never lifted a free weight in high school. Back then we didn't have weights. We had a weight machine. And so when I went, my freshman year in college is when I first lifted a free weight. And I mean, I was really weak, and which was my advantage because I never relied on my strength learning to throw. It was always my technique. So then as I started getting stronger, and if anybody knows throwers, most guys are benching 500 pounds. My best bench was 395. I could incline 405. And that may seem a lot to a distance runner, so to speak, but to a thrower, I was one of the weakest throwers out there. And I had strong legs and I could Olympic lift really well. And I did some competing in Olympic lifting, and that was but as far as just overall strength comparison, that wasn't the key to me throwing far. It was athleticism and technique.
Isn't that so different of today? Just the really emphasis on like free weights. And share with the listeners your training after college. So maybe the kind of how you finished at the end of your college career, and then the training after college for the Olympics in your first attempt in 1988. And just kind of what you went through in that period of time too.
You lose a lot of the support and identity with another team. One thing I would say is I want to really thank the University of Minnesota. They allowed me to train post-collegiately at the facility. And that was the one thing, is that the University of Minnesota Athletic Department, Paul Giel and then Joel Maturi afterwards, were so supportive of athletes because there were a lot of wrestlers. I don't know if you remember back, Minnesota had a great wrestling program and hockey players. And these were guys and some football players who were training post-collegiately. and they had a very open, welcoming attitude. But it was just business as usual for me. So that I was very fortunate that way. But it was a different rhythm. You had a lot more. You were more independent. You felt a little bit more isolated. And then you had to get a job because you didn't have scholarships. So I know I worked a lot of different jobs part time just to support myself and just to put food on the table and a place to live was all I cared about.
And then just talk about your first attempt in 1988. I know you came close to, and then how you what you felt like after not making the team in 88.
It's a story. So I'll try to make it brief. I was training, everything was up to that point. I was hitting my training marks even through college. I felt like I was on track, and I felt like 88 was going to be the year that I broke through. I was a good age, 25 years old, and I felt like that was a good strength age. I felt like my experience was there. I had really good training up to that point, and we laid out a great training plan for 88, and I was hitting all my marks. And my best throw in a competition up to that point was around 69 feet, 68, 11 and 3/4. And I was ranked top 10 in the world, but USA was the best throws program at that time in the world. And we had the most shot putters competing at a high level. And it was harder almost to make the Olympic team or to make the team than it was to actually earn a medal. To get on the top 3 in the US was, so I had my peak was the trials in order just to make the team. And so everything was going well. And we had a plan about 2 to 3 weeks out before the trials. I was going to try to hit a big throw in practice. And then you train hard and then you back off your training. And that's when you really peak. 3 weeks before the trials in 88, we wanted to hit 70 feet in practice. And if we did that, we felt like we could throw over 72 in the meet because I was a meet performer. Like I always threw further in meets. And so I hit 70 feet in practice, and it was like everything was just laying into place. So at the time, that was my identity. I was very much into myself at that time. I was not living a very God-honoring life. I was just kind of living the life of a hyper masculine athlete in our culture and enjoying it because it's fun and enjoying all the attention. But when you get injured like that and you're out of college, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of medical support. You're just on your own. 2 weeks before the trials in a practice, I can't even explain why, but I went through easy throw, and I strained a muscle in my right. They call it adductor, or it's the muscle that pulls the leg or sweeps the leg, and that was a big part of the rotation. And it inhibited me from practicing for 2 weeks. And the mental part of the game was the toughest part, and I didn't handle it really well, and it was pretty unsettling. I'll say that, and your confidence gets shaken because you just can't practice for 2 weeks. And luckily, in going into the trials, in order to make a team, the top 24 in the country compete for 3 spots, and you have to finish in the top 3. My leg healed enough where I could compete. I had one practice the night before, and that was just to see if my leg hurt or not. And my third throw, I threw 67 feet, 8 inches, and that was in third place. And that, if the competition would have ended, I would have made the team. There's 6 rounds in the final. You get the best throw of 6 attempts. And on the 4th attempt, I was still in third place. 5th attempt, I was still in third place. And going into the final round, I thought, I did it, man. No one's going to throw further. And one guy out of nowhere, he was like in 8th place. He threw 67 feet, 8 1/4 inch. And I had one throw left and I couldn't come back. And I remember someone saying to me, "You mean you couldn't throw a 1/4 inch further?" I'm like, "Oh, brother, you're lucky right now that I'm a Christian," because at that time, that was not the question that was not a good question to ask me, because of course I did my best. It was interesting, after the competition, someone observed, and they actually said, "Ron, you look like you didn't care. Someone challenged me. It was like, after the competition, you look like you didn't care out there." And that was an interesting comment. And as I walked away from that person abruptly, I had thought to myself, and this person said, you just sat there on the bench. You didn't swear. You didn't get mad. You didn't cry. You just looked like you didn't care. And what that person didn't realize is what I was feeling was empty. I didn't feel any, I felt worthless. I felt, is this all there is? I worked my whole life up to that point for this one moment to miss it by 1 centimeter. I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I just felt so low and so empty at the time. So that's kind of how I felt.
You were made for more clarity, more confidence, more impact. At Maupin Coaching, I help high school and college athletes master the mental game and guide men into purpose-driven leadership. Grab the sports book, rock that merch coming soon, and step into more at maupincoaching.com. We'll share with the listeners after that, going forward, as you train for the Olympic trials for the 1992 Olympics, how God, you talked about this, how saved you and what happened 2 weeks before the trials.
Yeah, there's a point of reflection after that where you just go, okay, what did I do next? I actually had a workout with the Vikings. And someone said, hey, the Vikings are interested in looking at you for a workout. It doesn't mean a tryout. It's just a workout. And unfortunately, I sprained my ankle the night before the workout, so I didn't perform, which is, I think, part of God's hand in my life. But, what do you do? I'm 25 years old. I've been dreaming about this since I was 12. I don't really have much going on right now. And so I just didn't want to give up on my dream. And that was, for me, that was my motto, is never give up. I remember hearing that quote from Winston Churchill, never, never give up. That was his message to the world against Hitler in World War II. And I just didn't want to give up on my dream. I didn't want to have regrets. No regrets, no regrets. Quite frankly, I had nothing else going on. And it was all I knew, and it was what I loved. And so, unfortunately, you have to wait 4 years. That's 4 years of doing it all over again, living with other people in houses that are not the most, I think, college life. I remember my standard meal for train when I was eating, my standard meal was I made up 2 cups of white rice, a can of tuna, and a can of peas, and I dumped them all together and ate it because I had carbs, protein, and vegetables, and with soy sauce. That was pretty much a meal 2 or 3 times a week. That's what I could afford. It was a lot. It was sacrificing, but I didn't know what else to do at that time. And then leading up to, I grew up in a religious, going to church, but not really understanding what it meant, what God really wanted from me. I thought it was, my whole orientation was, God just wants you to be a good person, and then you'll be judged how good a person you are. That goes back to that whole comparison model. And that goes back to judging myself against another flawed human being. That is such a bad model, to try to be better than other people who are sinful. I'm just going to be better than other terrible people, like people who have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Everyone has. So you try to be a better person, but that sin nature that we have really pulls you towards sin. And I believed in God, but I just was not living for God. I was living for myself. And eventually in 1992, going into the trials, I got myself in a relationship with somebody that it didn't end well. I was really low emotionally and mentally, but my training, my salvation was my throwing. It was going great. And so I just dedicated myself to get myself back online in March and trained hard through the outdoor season and getting ready for the trials in 92. And quite frankly, I met someone who was different than a lot of people I was spending time with. They just seemed like a better person. And it just happens to be a gal that I was training. And my friend who trained her said, why don't you ask this girl out on a date? I said, Mike, girls like her don't go out with guys like me. And what God was doing in my life was showing me my sin. I was really starting to look at myself as a person and not really liking what I was seeing, knowing that I was not living a life that served others. And so eventually I asked this girl out, and she said, yeah, sure. And the first question she asked me at dinner was, she says, are you a Christian? And I went, what? And she goes, no, are you a Christian? Because that's important to me. My faith is important. I could tell she was different than most of the people I spent time with. And I said, I don't know if I'm a Christian, but I think I am. And if that's your answer, you're probably not. But I just said, but I think there's a good person inside me just waiting to get out. And she shared how Christ changed her life, her testimony. And she shared how God is just continuing to change her life and invited me to go to church. And again, I was pro God. I believed in God. And the Bible tells us so do the demons and so does the devil. And so I was on par with them at that point. At least I had that belief. And I didn't love God more than myself. And eventually I learned that I needed to love God more than myself, more than anything. And God radically changed my life. I remember just learning about Jesus and what he had done for me and dying on the cross. And God started to work in my life. It wasn't because I figured it out. God just touched my life. The Holy Spirit started really working. I felt drawn to give my life to Jesus. And 2 weeks before the Olympic trials in '92, I went forward on an altar call at this church I was attending. And in front of a lot of people, I said, just me. But I felt like it was just a moment where God just touched my heart, filled me with his spirit. And what changed for me was not like all of a sudden I signed up to be a religious person. That's not what I signed up to be. It was God changed me. I didn't know. I just wanted Jesus. And I knew I was sinful. I knew I needed salvation. I knew I needed to be saved. I knew I needed my sins to be paid for. And I put my faith and trust in Jesus to do that. And what changed immediately was my desires. And the Bible says that God will give you the desires of your heart. Mm-hmm. He doesn't give you what you want. He actually gives you new desires. And that's what changes your behavior. So if people say, is this person a Christian? Is this person a Christian? It's not so much did they say a prayer or do they attend church, has their life changed? Has Jesus transformed their life? And that's why you talk about evidence. And that starts by God, the Holy Spirit, now going, okay, we're going a different direction. That's what repentance means. I had to repent, say, I'm not going to live for myself like that anymore. I'm going to live for God and honor God with my life. And I wanted to. It wasn't forced. It wasn't like I was doing this to go to heaven. I wanted to do it. And God shaped my desires. And before I swore all the time. And I just was part of my language. But then it just seemed offensive to me. And then I wanted to honor God with my language. The way I conducted my personal life and dating and stuff was not God honoring. It was not biblical. Then all of a sudden, I wanted to honor women and I wanted to date and relate to women in a way that honored God and the way the Bible told me to do that and how to treat them as people and as sisters in Christ and honor them and respect them. That wasn't my orientation before. You just live for today. And I just wanted to read the Bible. I never wanted to read. I don't know how you can explain me never wanting to read the Bible and like going, you got to be kidding me. This Jesus stuff to like all I wanted to do. I wanted to read the Bible and talk about Jesus all the time. You can't explain that. That I don't care what people say about whether Christianity or Jesus rose from the dead. I know Jesus transformed my life.
Story right there of transformation. Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Mm-hmm. Now share with the listeners about making the Olympic team. Now you look at it differently now and your experience participating in the 1992 Summer Olympic Games. Yeah.
I went to the trials and it's a fun story. I go there, obviously I have a different orientation about my life, but I still have to show up to practice. Mm-hmm. I still have to train, and I still have to lift, and I still have to compete. And that's what those many years of competing, I'm 29, I've been doing this a while at a high level, 10 years, and all that training came together. And my first throw, I threw 68 feet, 3 1/4 inch, or 68 feet 1 3/4. And then I was in first place through the third round, and a guy passed me up. And I was in second place in the third round, fourth round, fifth round, and in the last and final round, a guy by the name of Jim Doring, the same guy who beat me in '88, who passed me on his last throw, he bumped me from second to third on his last throw, beat me by an inch. And I always joke, I say, I hate that guy. Actually, I don't hate Jim. But it was ironic. But the great thing was is I went from second to third, and I still made the Olympic team. And so then, that moment where you go, that's awesome. And people say, Ron, did you make the team because you were born again? Because now you have got, no, I made the team because I worked my rear end off. But my purpose was different. My reason, I wanted to glorify God and shine God's light and not glorify myself. So my why changed. But I made the team because I put the time and effort in and I mastered. I was at that moment in time, I got third place, and that's why I made the team.
And then the 1992 Olympics were held
Barcelona.
So share with us, maybe just give us a little, like a 30-second just experience. I know you could go on and on.
No, I know. But the best, when you talk about what's the best experience about being in the Olympics, I guess it's the idea. And again, this is a little bit of double-edged sword in sports. There are rewards. And it does feel good to be a part of an elite group of people. Mm-hmm. And it was special to gather in Florida before we went overseas to our training camp in Florida to realize, or in France, to realize I walk in the room and I'm part of an elite group. And the kind of fun part is we gathered in Florida and it was like a staging, and we got all our equipment. We got our clothes, our uniforms. Back then you didn't get what you get now, but it was cool to get free stuff, and with the USA all over it. And just to walk in that room and they say, hey, you get treated nice and you get stuff and you get your big bag, and they said, we'll take it over for you and we'll have it there for you. And it was kind of like, that was a cool experience. And then just to walk in that stadium, even though I didn't compete very well and I only got 10th place, and it was just really cool experience to be a part of the Olympic Village too, to see all these, you see all these gymnasts. You're like, it's so funny. You see these throwers or these big guys, basketball players, and then you see these gymnasts walking by and they look like they're like 12 years old. And it's like, it's just such a contrast. It's such a surreal thing to be in that cafeteria in the Olympic Village and all these other athletes are there. And it was just fun. I was doing it with my friends. A lot of these track athletes were my friends over the years of just traveling over Europe and on the European circuit together. You just build a relationship. And I even built relationship with other athletes from other countries. So you'd see them and you connect with them. And I competed early. And so I actually stayed in the village for another like 8 days afterwards. And I went and saw all the other events. I saw Michael Jordan play, the Dream Team. I went and saw, that was so cool to see all these other athletes compete. And I just loved that. So the whole experience was awesome.
So why don't you share with the listeners as you continue on your journey as being a kind of high profile athlete in the FCA. Maybe you can explain what FCA is. And then they wanted you to share your testimony.
Yeah, after I got done competing, it's okay, now what do I do with the rest of my life? And I explored different options. At that point, I was a business education major, and I felt like maybe try and go be a salesperson. I like connecting with people. I think it's always been my strength, is relating to a lot of different people, connecting, liking to meet new people. So I started exploring some sales jobs out there, and found a friend, a guy named Wheelock Whitney, who I met because of my competing at the Olympics, and through connections with different people, got introduced to him. And he always said, why don't you go into financial planning? And so I did that for a couple of years. But for me, understanding what I like doing, I have to experience it. So it's a trial and error for me. So I did financial planning for a couple of years. And wasn't my aptitude. I could tell that wasn't my gift and not where God wanted me. But during this time post-Olympics, this group of these people that I talked to before, like I've heard of Fellowship of Christian Athletes before. And in high school, there was a coach who was leading a group, and he was a basketball coach, really good guy. But I went once and I wasn't comfortable because I wasn't interested in those things at that time, or at least personal accountability or investing myself in that beyond what I had. I went through confirmation. I was done. I was ready to move on, and that wasn't important to me at the time. And then in college, I went to a college retreat for FCA just because there was a bunch of people going, and it was at a camp and guys and girls, and it was more for me like a social thing. So I went, and that's where I first heard this idea of the gospel or born again. And I even said the prayer, salvation prayer, but my life didn't change. Actually, my sin life took off after that. So even though you say a prayer doesn't mean you're saved, I don't believe. It's your heart that matters. Because at that point, I just wanted fire insurance. I just didn't want to go to hell. And that's not why you put your faith and trust in Jesus. That's not the only reason. But what was interesting is when I finished with the Olympics and had opportunities, I remember once, this is a fun story, Roger. I had been on KFAN in '88 when leading up to the Olympics and on KQRS. So I had been on some of these radio programs and done interviews as not a Christian. And one of the guys that was on the KQRS in the mornings was Dave Huffman, played for the Vikings. He and I had been on a show together. And I was good friends with Tom Bernard at the time. And then fast forward 4 years, KFAN asked me to come in and be, after I made the Olympic team, and Dave Huffman was working for KFAN at the time. And he was interviewing me about just kind of like training, and I was focused on sports radio. But he stopped and he goes, folks, I don't know what it is. He goes, but Ron, you're a different person. Because I met you 4 years ago and you were your typical arrogant, athlete. He goes, but you're different. Like you're totally a different person. And he goes, what happened? And I looked at him and I was like, this is not where the interview was supposed to go. And I just said, do you really want me to tell you? And he goes, yeah. I said, I gave my life to Jesus. I said, I realized that I was a sinful person and I needed Jesus, and I gave my life. I repented and put my faith and trust in Jesus, and he's totally changed my life. And it was dead silence. Like it was like there was a pause. There was dead air. And he just went, so you must lift a lot of weights. And that was his next question. I said, yeah, I lift a lot of weights. But that was where it was my first chance to really publicly say, I'm a believer in Jesus. Well, so then people started contacting me, which I was always open to. I love talking about I love sharing what Jesus did in my life. I love proclaiming Jesus. I loved sharing the gospel. And that was just something God put on my heart to do. And so when FCA said, hey, we have this event, and I was familiar with FCA, and I got to meet some of the staff, and one guy in particular, Randy Jensen, who's still on staff. He's been on staff. You may have met Randy Jensen before. He's a basketball official in a lot of games, and he's been on staff over 40 years, still on staff, awesome guy. I connected with him, so I started speaking at these events with FCA. So that's how I got to know FCA. And then after college, they had this staff person who was working with a lot of the college athletes. And when they graduated, so they had a place to be and belong, she would host once a month post-collegiate fellowships with people who've been involved in FCA in the past. And this is a cool story. So she invited me to come there because I had no community at the time. And that's so important. I didn't really have a Christian community after I got saved. And I started going to this once a month thing. And the kids were a little bit younger than I was, but we were all into it. And I was moving on to my career, but I still would take opportunities. And then one day, this one young woman walked in the room, and she had Chuck Taylors on and a flannel shirt. And I thought, this is my kind of gal. And she sat next to me, and I got to talk to her a little bit and find out about her. And she was a high school teacher and coach and fun gal. And then she asked me what I did. And I said, I'm in financial planning. She goes, oh, I need to do that. I need to set up an account. I said, well, I can help you with that. So the next thing you know, we're dating, and 9 months later, we're engaged, and then we're married. And now we've been married almost since 1995. This is our 30th year. Her name is Michelle Backus, and she's the chaplain. She's the chaplain of the Minnesota Lynx. She's been their chaplain for the entirety of almost of their whole existence.
So 30-year anniversary this year, huh?
Yeah, and she actually had chapel last night. So she did chapel, and there are a bunch of girls from the Lynx coming again. And we've had people like, you need to interview Michelle, because we've had Maya Moore in our house. We've had all these people. Like, she really builds a relationship with these players and minister to them in this environment of the WNBA. And it's really it affected my kids. That's one thing cool about FC. Both of us being on staff, our kids have really been positively affected by seeing other athletes not being afraid to talk about their faith or seeing their lives changed. And my daughter Carmen played basketball at a pretty high level at Wisconsin. Injuries prevented her from really having the career she could have had. And my son Bo is now at Liberty University and the track team. He's throwing shot discus and having fun with that. So we've been blessed with that. But like I said, I tried financial planning and I taught high school at Rosemont where I met you.
Yeah, I think it was Eastview. I think you were there for.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was at Rosemont for 3 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Eastview for a semester. I was going to say a centimeter. I've got that in my head. A semester. And then I got a chance to coach at Ohio State. And it was there when I realized I didn't want to coach Division I. And I didn't want to coach for the guy I coached with because the head coach was not the greatest person. And so I was like, and then I started getting, this is where it got me into ministry. I got mentored by a guy from Athletes in Action named Jim Schmidtke. Long-term staff guy, just a great guy. He came alongside. I met him through some friends. He helped me start a coach's Bible study because I said, Jim, will you help me start a coach's Bible study? And he empowered me to lead it. Here I am, a new Christian, but he's already prepping me and mentoring me and discipling me, and I'm leading this ministry. And I'm still, and then all of a sudden I'm doing more speaking. I got connected to FCA Ohio. Next thing you know, I said, Jim, I don't want to coach at this. I love coaching and I still coach, but I want to do what you do. And he goes, but I want to move back to Minnesota. And he realized that AIA didn't have a big presence then, but FCA did. So he goes, you should go back and reconnect with your FCA people and see if you can go on staff with FCA. And that's how I got connected back in '99 with FCA. It was a process of wanting to move back to Minnesota. My wife was pregnant with Carmen. Michelle was pregnant with Carmen. And they hired me, and I've been on staff over 25 years and done a lot of different roles with FCA.
I know you had mentioned that you now also speak at some men's groups too, right?
Yeah, a big part of, for me, my passion is coaches. FCA is coaches and athletes, right? But coaches are the key. Coaches are the gatekeeper to sport. They determine what gets taught. They develop culture. Coaches are, what's important to them is seen in how they coach. And so in FCA, we have campus ministry going on. We have adult volunteers. Sometimes our coaches leading like on-campus groups, faith groups once a week. We call them huddles, sport analogy. And it's awesome. That's where high school kids, middle school kids, college kids who are athletes can come together and grow in their faith, learn how to integrate and live it out in their sport, have that community. And a lot of kids come to Christ through FCA. A lot of kids get empowered to lead, be Christ-centered leaders, because we really use a discipleship model. Our whole theme in FCA our strategy is E3, which is engage, equip, empower. We're trying to raise up Christ-centered leaders in sport, whether they're coaches, so how they coach their teams, and just the way they coach. There's a difference, Roger, between being a coach who's a Christian and a Christian coach. And I want to help coaches coach and live biblically. I want to help them really learn how to be led by the Spirit as a coach, to really have a purpose beyond X's and O's and wins and losses, to have a Christ-centered Great Commission purpose, a missional purpose as a coach. And we actually have training and a coaching model that's very biblically oriented called 3D coaching, that we help them learn how to really coach the whole person, not just the physical, but the mental and the spiritual, or the heart. And they're capturing hearts of athletes and they're building trust. And so if the athlete trusts the coach with the X's and O's and their athleticism and their performance, they're going to also trust him with other areas. And so it's this missional mindset. They can't preach Jesus during practice. They can't do that. But they build a relationship that eventually they have opportunities to either outside of sport, outside of school, or post high school where they can share the gospel. They can connect kids to FCA. That's where that FCA becomes this partnership in a school. So you have this huddle, these kids getting together weekly, and then you have these coaches who are not directly leading that huddle. They're giving opportunities for some other student athletes to come in and share about FCA. So you've seen it with Terry Greener at Eastview, where she does the thing, but then like other coaches are partnering with it. So it's a great way for me. My heart is to help coaches, and I love them. I want them to find their transformational coaching purpose I want them to be transformational coaches, not transactional. And worst case scenario, some coaches, I just want them to stop harming kids.
So what have you seen going forward, let's say like the last 2 to 3, 4 years, regards to on some of these college campus, high schools, this revival taking place? I know it doesn't maybe always get a lot of media attention, but if you listen to others on which you would have these connections about what's happening on these high school and especially these college campuses around the country.
Roger, I think at the base of it, it's a hunger for truth, and it's a hunger for relationship and connection. As our culture as a whole it's interesting. I'm just going to be totally blunt here, Roger. And Scripture says you'll know it's the last days, and when they start calling evil good and good evil, that which our culture held up as righteous is now demeaned and considered evil. The nuclear family, no sex before marriage, purity, all those things are actually now looked upon negatively by our culture. And what's being celebrated is all that is sinful. You know what I mean? And it's as these kids and all the social media and everything is so contrary to what God, the character and nature of God, that people are like, they're sensing in their spirit, in their hearts, like, this isn't good for me. Like they're going down that road and then ending up empty and isolated and lonely. And they're like, this isn't the way to live. And they have anxiety and depression, and they don't know why. And they're like, I need something I can base my life on. I need truth. I want love, true love, not selfish love, unconditional love, self-sacrificing love, where they really feel valued and cared for. And it's unbelievable how people, and this is not just athletes in high school, this is people. God's doing something, and it's because the world's embraced this anti-God culture and lifestyle, and it'll destroy them. Now they're seeing people just being destroyed, and they're like, I don't want that in my life. And they may have heard of Jesus, or they may have had it, and they're like, I need to get back to that. I need to get back to truth. And so you're seeing, and the thing with sports in our culture, 95% of people in our culture either participate in sport or consume sport media in some way. 95%. There's nothing more influential in our culture than sport. Maybe music and entertainment. But the people are just connected. And for an athlete, there's no more influential person than the coach. Billy Graham said one coach will impact more young people. One coach will impact more people in a year than most people will in a lifetime. And I believe he was right. And FCA, we're coaching the coaches. We want a multiplication impact. We impact one coach. We help them become a missional coach, truly a Christian coach whose purpose is beyond X's and O's and wants to be transformational and change lives and help them do that. They'll impact dozens and hundreds of kids over their career. And so the high value target at FCA is coaches. And everything flows through that. We have great camps. For a parent, wouldn't you want your child to go to an FCA camp where they're going to have high level coaching, and then they're also going to be talking about what's going on inside them, and they're going to find truth and wholeness? Or do you want to send them to a scholarship mill where they're just going to be one of the numbers, and it's just running them through, and coaches are going to be, so what do you want for your kid? And we're seeing an increase in camp numbers, increase in parents. So if you are concerned about the heart of your athlete, your young child, your athletes on your team, if you're a coach who wants more, who is not satisfied with just wins and losses and that's it, or just if you want to learn how to be transformational and to really make an impact, you need to contact FCA and call Minnesota FCA and call me. I'm easily found through the FCA Minnesota website. I'll come along. I'll drive anywhere. If a coach really wants to take it to that next level and just needs hey, I just need some support as a coach, and I want to learn to be a better coach, call me, get a hold of me. You can put my information. You can put my information, my email, my cell phone number, in our state website. You can put that in your whatever post credits or whatever.
All right, kind of wrapping this up. What are a few final thoughts that you want to leave with men as they continue on their journey?
Yeah, with men, I want to understand is that God's got a purpose for us, and He's got a purpose for us. It's called the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, Matthew 28. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says, teaching them everything I've taught you. And then he goes, and I will be with you to the end of the age. It is a partnership with Jesus. Jesus is actually transforming lives. We can be a part of that. And that's where men, you don't have to be perfect to make impact in other people's lives. Actually, if you have a desire and you look at your life and you go, I'm not there yet, good. Because when you start pouring into others and you get mentored so that you can mentor others and disciple others. So my heart is to start to come alongside men. I love coaches. I love ministering to men. I spoke at a men's retreat, and I just talk about this idea of this will blow you away. And this is a stat from a book by David MacGyver. By the way, can I promote a book that I think is phenomenal?
Sure.
David MacGyver, and you need to have him on. He's the former chaplain for the Twins. And he wrote a book called Looking for the One. And in the beginning intro, there's a statistic that says that, you're not going to believe this, less than 4% of Christians will ever share their personal faith story with anybody in their entire life. That means, if that's true, I was speaking to a group of men, there's about 50 men. I said, that means only 2 of you statistically have ever shared that, not even the gospel, just the reason for the hope that you have, because that's what Paul says, be ready to share the reason for the hope that you have in Christ. That means only 2 of that, and I challenge these men. I said, that means 48 of you are okay with being the very last Christian on earth. You're good. You're going to heaven, and everybody else, you're on your own. And I know that's not their heart, but in reality, it's like, and so like, why aren't they share? Why aren't people willing to share in just a really comfortable way, even ask permission? Why aren't they willing, or why aren't they doing it more? I just don't think they're prepped. I don't think they're prepared. They've never done it before. I have a heart to come alongside men to engage them, equip them, and empower them to be difference makers in the world for Christ. And all men, not just coaches, but coaches as well. If you have a men's retreat or something like that, I love doing that. I love coming in and talking about how can we be a part of each other's lives and mentoring each other and building each other up so that we can be what Christ wanted us to be.
Those are 3 powerful words that you shared about the engage, equip, and empower.
Equip and empower. That's what we want to engage God first. We want to engage people in relationship. We want to engage with the gospel, and we want to engage to multiply. And then we want to equip them in prayer, Bible study. We want to equip them in community. And we want to equip them to multiply, and then we want to empower them by showing them how to do it. And we call that, you want to model it, we want to assist them, we want to watch them, and we want to launch them. And we want to be disciples making disciples. Jesus didn't want just super followers. He wants disciples making disciples. And that's how the gospel is spread throughout the world.
All right, Ron, thank you so much for your willingness to share your story. And where can listeners find you and follow your story?
Yeah, I'm not on social media. I'm an old school guy. I'm face-to-face guy. So I'll do Zoom. But my phone number is 651-271-8986. My email is rbackus@fca.org. Or you can go to minnesotafca.org. Just spell it's the whole state, minnesotafca.org, and learn more about FCA and get connected with our local staff all over the state. And then by the way, I have to say one more thing. We are a global organization. We're in 102 countries all over the world, and FCA.org is our national website.
All right, that's a wrap with Ron Backus, and I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.
Thanks, Roger. It's been awesome.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at maupincoaching.com.